You are living in the most dangerous time in American history.
We won't take a single back step.
Former professional basketball player is now the Republican Party's choice.
Can you imagine Royce White, the U.S. Senate?
White won the endorsement on May 18th with 67% of the vote.
There's nothing that guarantees we win, but I guarantee you if we lose, we will die.
Way on earth that I would ever want my daughter to watch and look at Megan Thee Stallion as something to be or a role model or nothing like that. I just wouldn't. And that's the type of stuff that gets pushed to young women. So at the end of the day, I'm just saying, as a man, when I look at a politician, I'm looking at a politician that's saying, hey, I'm gonna get somebody to get out a message to the young people, and it's somebody with that type of persona. I don't like it. I'm not saying everybody don't have to like it. I'm just telling you, for me, I just think that it's horrible. I just think that it's a bad thing. Just same way I think it's bad when I see a grown woman sitting down with her 8-year-old daughter on the couch watching baddies and letting her mind get infiltrated with all this nonsense. That's not something that for young women, but that's what y'all do. Y'all let our young black children, we cry victim, but then we poison our children with all this stuff. We put all this shit in their minds, and then we say, oh, we just victims because we black. Nah, man, we can't do that, man. We can't do that, bro. Megan Thee Stallion is not a good role model for young women.
We got a lot of questions to get through. You threw it off.
She's not a good role model for young women. Hey, you can't swear that. Hold on, man. You cannot swear. If we just being honest, and you an educator, you want your young female student to look at Megan Thee Stallion as a role model, bro?
Megan graduated.
Hey, no, I don't care. That's not the message that she's pushing to these girls.
No.
She's pushing shake your ass and twerk and all that bullshit.
We're moving
Come on,
away
man.
from.
I'm just saying, if I'm running for president, I ain't gonna have Megan Thee Stallion talking to young people and telling them to vote for me.
But you're not running for president.
I'm not running for president.
So what I'm also gonna,
that's the problem. We as black people, we want to push debauchery and deviancy to our young people and then cry.
No, because we can't. We literally cannot.
Do that, man.
No, hold on.
We want to push demonic forces in our kids' life and then cry.
Really quick.
Come on, man. Really do that. Come on, man. Y'all want to give these kids Satan and then cry about what's what? Come on, man.
So hold on.
Come on, man.
Welcome back to another episode of Please Call Me Crazy, brought to you by Free People Radio and powered by our favorite sponsor, TireGate.com. That's TireGate.com. You have to buy tires from somebody. You might as well buy them from us. Help fund the movement. Help support the movement. We believe in the freedom of movement, and that's exactly what the establishment wants to take from you now. I'm your host, Royce White, here in the belly of the beast, Minneapolis, Minnesota, and this is episode 287. Today is Monday, October 27th, year of our Lord, 2025, and we're happy to have you here again this evening. We apologize. We didn't have a show on Friday due to technical difficulties, but we are now in the era of the daily Please Call Me Crazy podcast, so we'll be going Monday through Friday. We'll be airing, premiering, posting Monday through Friday at 9 p.m. Central. And today, here we are, Monday. Last week, we had a strange schedule, and we didn't get a chance to do our normal reaction show. So today is going to be a little bit of a hybrid between a reaction show, and I want to do a deep dive on something that Steve Bannon said earlier, but I also want to do a deep dive on this cold open clip you just saw. Number one, the people are coming. And that clip from that courageous black man about the condition of the black community is exactly what can help save this republic. It's exactly the type of courage and honesty that can help save black communities, save the black community, but in turn help save the entire country in a moment of peril. And we are in a moment of peril. But last week, again, our schedule got a little funky because Stephen A. Smith dropped the interview between myself and him. So I posted that. And then Jake Duesenberg and I from the local Action for Liberty organization that is committed to fighting against the Uniparty and the Rhino establishment here in Minnesota. He and I had a long interview, a great interview, and I invite you to go back and watch both interviews. I had a great time, and I enjoyed talking to both of those men. So that's why our schedule got a little funky last week, and we're back on regular schedule for this week. And I want to say about Stephen A. Smith before we start here, because it kind of pertains to the black community. What Stephen A. Smith is doing is courageous by even having people from the other side of the aisle on. Now, most of us would look at that and go, hey, that's just what you should do. That just logical makes sense. But that's not the country that we live in. That's not the country that we let get out of control. The country we let get out of control is a certain political view, a certain lean on politics, is in control of not only our corporations and our media, but also our banking and a number of other very influential institutions. So I see Stephen A. Smith trying to walk a fine line, and he's in a unique position. I'm not giving up on him yet. I think he's moving in the right direction. The same way I think Chris Cuomo is moving in the right direction, although I have more hesitancy about Chris Cuomo than I do Stephen A. because Chris Cuomo is not novice in politics. Chris Cuomo is a political lifer. He knows exactly. He knows more about politics in this country than any 25 people that you could name or count. So I give him less leniency in my judgment of his direction than a guy like Stephen A. Smith, who is for the most part been very successful in the broadcast business. He's one of the highest paid broadcasters in the history of human civilization, making almost $40 million a year, they estimate, which is a lot more than a lot of the basketball players or athletes that he covers. And he's been mostly focused on sports. Now, does his opinion cross over into culture and politics? Absolutely. But he's been mostly constrained to sports. As of late, as many of us have become more interested in politics and more outspoken about our views on politics. So I see him doing that. His latest take about President Trump and this NBA gambling scandal is completely wrong, in my opinion. It's completely off base. Obviously, this investigation started under the Biden administration, and I believe, it's my belief that the timing of the execution of this indictment or these warrants or these arrests around the NBA scandal, NBA gambling scandal, have more to do with the start of the NBA season and less to do with any personal vendetta that President Trump has against the NBA. Now, the obvious narrative is that the NBA is full of black athletes and it leans woke and liberal and there's an animosity, a political animosity there between President Trump, the MAGA movement, and conservative media, and the NBA, and what tends to be in more alignment with the liberal media and the movements like the LGBTQ, the feminists, and BLM deal. Also, China, you could say the pro-China lean of the NBA is very obvious, but I don't really think it's about any of that. That's my personal opinion. And just as a matter of preface, there's nothing more un-American than shaving points. It's just not. I mean, it's one of the most un-American things you could do. And I do see the proliferation of gambling around sports in general as a concern, as a cause for as a general cause for concern for our society and for our culture and for our sports, especially as somebody who coaches. I'm professional in two sports, both basketball and mixed martial arts, and gambling used to be frowned upon in the sports world. Now it's been all but proliferated, and with that's going to cause some problems. I mean, players, athletes are going to be more drawn to gambling as they see a gambling culture erected around the sport that they're involved in. And that's not to make an excuse for them. I mean, you could see drugs being used around you every day, and that doesn't give you the right or make it right to use drugs. You could see any number of poor behaviors being displayed or exhibited around you every day. That doesn't make it right to follow suit. It's kind of like we talk about in the black community. We can talk about how much, or we can discuss how much crime people see, how much debauchery we see in the music, like the man is talking about here in the clip. That doesn't justify it for the next person. Now, strategically speaking, from a political standpoint and from a cultural standpoint, do we acknowledge the more exposure that a certain group of people have to a certain type of behavior, the more prone they are to follow in that behavior? That's just common sense. You could take an experiment, and they've shown these experiments where somebody comes into a room where the people who are already sitting in the room, let's take it a doctor's office or some type of setting like that, the people who are already sitting in the room are in on the experiment. They know that there's an experiment happening, and there'll be some type of visual or audio or audible cue, like a beeping noise. And the person who comes into the experiment doesn't know the experiment's taking place. And so, for example, the one I saw recently online is where a woman comes into a room, and there's already about a dozen people sitting in this lobby or this waiting area, and the cue, the visual cue, or sorry, the audible cue is a beeping noise. And when the beep goes off, everybody who's sitting there stands up, and then they sit down. And as the woman's sitting there for a while, it takes her about 3 or 4 rounds until she starts to follow suit and stands up and sits down with the rest of the group. And then as people leave the experiment, again, it starts with everybody who's there before she comes in knows that there's an experiment. And then they start to slowly phase the people out who were involved in the initial experiment, and they bring new people in, or they let new people come in who don't know there's an experiment going on. And as the experiment goes further, it shows how people will pass along a belief, an ideology that had no real basis in reality other than it's what somebody saw before them. I mean, that's just kind of how culture is passed down. And we know that without doing a scientific experiment. It's just kind of cool to see it actually done in real time in a short and in a controlled setting, where by the time the experiment's over, nobody in the room was there at the beginning and knows there's an experiment, but yet they all stand up and sit down with the beep anyway. It's just kind of profound how the human mind gravitates towards groupthink. And so that's a problem for us culturally, politically, spiritually, so on and so forth. But it's certainly an issue when it comes to gambling, the proliferation of gambling, but also you could argue the proliferation of vice in general that extends beyond gambling. I said this to Rob Schmidt on Newsmax the other day when I was on the show, that if we're going to go all the way down to the bottom of the barrel and reach in and say, what are the dangers on the horizon for us as a society? You got to look at technology as the big one, right? You got to look at technology and the advent of artificial intelligence and the normalcy around the two as the real threat on the horizon. The normalcy, the acceptance, the apathy of that danger and what it's already doing to our society and culture as the real signal from the noise. Gambling, absolutely. But the real vice, the real driver of vice is obviously the internet. Why do I say that? Well, people are spending more than 60% of their time on the internet, and more than 60% of the internet is pornography. I mean, just do the math. And this is apropos to this cold open in this clip. And if you're just joining the podcast, I'm gonna play it again for you because it's so moving in that. And I'm showing you this because this is what Black men have to deal with in America, in their own community, with other Black people and other Black men when they want to say something that's completely reasonable and logical. Let's take another listen. And again, I only do this because this is the reality. And here he's talking about, Meg the Stallion. And I'm not exactly sure how Meg the Stallion came up in this context, but I think we can all say with some level of confidence, a high level of confidence, that Meg the Stallion, she's a female rapper, very popular female rapper, who makes catchy music, who makes music that's decent, rap music, comparative for the time, right? She certainly had a lot of commercial success, or she wouldn't be a household name. So she has some talent. I mean, I'm not saying that she's not talented. It's not what I would call talent. I think Billie Holiday is talented, and hopefully by the end of the episode, I'll have time to pull up a Billie Holiday song, and we'll be able to play that here. It's part of our homage to the Remember Normal theme of the weekly podcast. But Billie Holiday is talented. You know, Whitney Houston was talented. Meg Thee Stallion, talented by comparison. And, you know, you're only good or bad by comparison. But I wouldn't say that she's very, very talented. She's decently talented by comparison for her time. But anyway, regardless, I think we can all say with a high level of confidence that she's not somebody we want our young daughters to imitate. And this even brings me to this. I saw this post this week about Kanye West and Kim Kardashian, and Kanye West was frustrated or spoken out about the way that North, Kanye West's daughter, had dressed. She had, you know, the color in her hair is like this crazy blue in her hair, and I think there were like tattoos drawn on her face full of makeup, and there were like fake tattoos drawn on her face, and she had the big gaudy diamond necklaces, and the internet is just, you know, siding with Kanye West for the most part, or siding with the logical parents who say it's not wrong to put standards and restrictions and boundaries on the things that you expose your children to and the things you allow your children to do or the people you allow your children to imitate. So let's listen to this clip again.
No way on earth that I would ever want my daughter to watch and look at Megan Thee Stallion as something to be or a role model or nothing like that. I just wouldn't. And that's the type of stuff that gets pushed to young women. So at the end of the day, I'm just saying, as a man, when I look at a politician, I'm looking at a politician that's saying, hey, I'm gonna get somebody to get out a message to the young people, and it's somebody with that type of persona. I don't like it. I'm not saying everybody don't have to like it. I'm just telling you, for me, I just think that it's horrible. I just think that it's a bad thing. Just the same way I think it's bad when I see a grown woman sitting down with her 8-year-old daughter on the couch watching baddies and letting her mind get infiltrated with all this nonsense. That's not something that for young women, but that's what y'all do. Y'all let our young black children, we cry victim, but then we pour.
Now watch this. This is an interesting turn here. You can see how uncomfortable he's making all of these hosts of this podcast or the other people on this podcast. But there's one person in particular, the person directly on his right, what would be his right, it's to your left. This guy right here, and I have my mouse here and I'm circling him. He has what appears to be an L on a hat. It's a green and beige hat, but you'll start to hear him try to railroad or take the conversation in another direction. He comes to the defense of Meg Thee Stallion, and there's a point in here where this guy, and you can find him on Instagram. I think his name is Panamanian Ricky on Instagram. That's where I found the clip. I'm not sure if that's him exactly. I didn't look that far into it, but you can look into his social media there. But anyway, you know, he says, even for teachers, like let's say you don't have a child. Let's say it's not your daughter. Let's say it's not your kid. Even as an educator, as somebody who's teaching young women, you can't honestly say that you want your young female students looking up to Meg Thee Stallion. And this guy rebuffs it, and he goes, well, Meg Thee Stallion graduated from in college, HBCU or whatever he's going to go on to say. And right away, the gentleman goes, but that's not the message she's pushing to these children. And it's such an important point because a lot of times they do this. They try and use the credentials of an individual, like a Meg Thee Stallion or Kamala Harris, let's say, anybody, AOC, any of them. They use the credentials to justify the message that they're pushing in real time, which is just intellectually dishonest. It's a sleight of hand. And right away, you know, this guy jumps all over it. Watch here.
Raising our children with all this stuff. We put all this shit in their minds, and then we say, oh, we just victims because we black. Nah, man, we can't do that, man. We can't do that, bro. Megan Thee Stallion is not a good role model for young women.
We got a lot the questions to get through. You threw it off.
She's not a good role model for young women. Hey, you can't swear that. Hold on, man. You cannot swear. If we just being honest and you an educator, you want your young female student to look at Megan Thee Stallion as a role model, bro?
Megan graduated.
Hey, no, I don't care. That's not the message that she's pushing to these girls. She's pushing shake your ass and twerk and all that bullshit.
We're moving away from.
If I'm running for president, I ain't gonna have Megan Thee Stallion talking to young people and telling them to vote for me.
But you're not running for president.
I'm not running for president.
So what I'm also gonna,
that's the problem.
Can we reel it in real quick?
We want to push debauchery and deviancy to our young people and then cry.
No, because we can't. We literally cannot.
Do that, man.
No, hold on.
We want to push demonic forces in our kids' and then cry.
Really quick.
Come on, man. Really do that. Come on, man. Y'all want to give these kids Satan and then cry about what's what. Come on.
And amen. You know, praise be to God. The people are coming. The reason I started off with this clip is because I feel like there's so much racial tension in our society today. And shout out to the great Steve Bannon for being one of the few voices, one of the lone voices in the conservative movement that understands the importance that of bringing together this coalition of whites, blacks, and Hispanics, working class whites, blacks, and Hispanics to push the populist movement, the nationalist populist movement against this globalist agenda. The people are coming. As much violence and chaos and self-destruction that we see displayed online and in these communities all across the country, there are black men trying to stand up and say, we need to do this differently. Something has to change. And they've been there the entire time. What you tend to find are situations like this one where you get one black man who just kind of is, and he just kind of loves to see, you know, he knows the tension's brewing. He knows that there's a conflict of opinion about to happen, and he's there for that part of it, right? This is the guy smiling right here. You can see him right here, closest to the right side of the screen here, and then you have the guy in the back. You can just see him, and the guy in the back furthest, all the way to the left. You know, he knows too. He knows that this is a contentious thing for this guy to be saying in this environment. And then you have the star of the show here, and I want to point this out because I think it's of the ultimate importance. The star of the show here, or at least he thinks he's the star of the show. The black man who's speaking common sense is the star of the show. The black man who's raising his finger in an effeminate way and saying flippant, sort of under his breath things about this individual who's speaking the truth. He thinks he's the star of the show. He thinks he's going to come to the defense of Meg Thee Stallion and black women, and I'm sure he wants to shake his ass the same way Meg Thee Stallion does, and that's kind of what effeminate black men tend to do. And they tend to come to the defense of the Meg Thee Stallions and say how, we're not going to be shaming her. And first of all, I haven't liked Meg Thee Stallion since the whole thing went down with Tory Lanez, and I still think that Tory Lanez was innocent. I think the great Lauren Boebert, if I'm not mistaken, might be Anna Paula Luna. I'm not sure, but one of them tried to bring some new evidence to light about the Meg Thee Stallion Tory Lanez case. And as many people know, or maybe you don't know, Tory Lanez was convicted of a crime and sentenced to 10 years in prison, which I think is extremely harsh and crazy given some of the crimes that I see happening in this country. And the penalties or the lack of penalty that happens. Tory Lanez being sentenced to over 10 years in prison seemed very harsh and very politically motivated in some way. And he was almost killed in prison. He was stabbed multiple times in prison by, I think, a Mexican inmate, if I'm not mistaken, or a Latino inmate. He was almost killed. They had a couple blood transfusions in order to save him. I think they nicked an artery and whatnot. But anyway, I haven't liked Meg Thee Stallion since then. I think it's absolutely crazy that Klay Thompson would be dating Meg Thee Stallion after such a debacle. And you see how I'm tying. I mean, this all ties back into the sports and Stephen A. Smith and the gambling thing is absolutely unhinged. And you got this black culture, and then you got people like Meg Thee Stallion. You got one lone black man here who's speaking out, as sort of the last of the Mohicans, so to speak. And saying, what are we teaching our young girls? Honestly, what are we teaching them? And there's an effeminate black man there that just is beside himself that this guy would even say what he's saying. So We're going to get to a few more clips here today, but I want to hone in and focus on this dynamic because this really is the dynamic holding this country back. It really is. I can't say, I've said it before, and I was scrutinized for it, and people say, oh, well, Royce, you're a sexist, you're a misogynist, you said women are too mouthy. And first of all, to reiterate, women have gotten mouthy in America. And when I say mouthy, I don't mean that women don't have a women. That's a funny term. A lot of mouthy women too, like this guy here. I mean, there are a ton of men that are mouthy or too mouthy for my taste as well. So it wasn't exclusive to women. I was asked a question about women by Steve Bannon. I was on his show where the picture that's painted of your average MAGA supporter are white, rube, old men who just want to go back to a time where they could beat on their wife. That's ridiculous. The question was, who think their wives have just gotten too mouthy. That's ridiculous. I mean, that's just what a caricature to paint of the MAGA movement and people who support President Trump or MAGA policies. But even furthermore, let's talk about the dynamic between men and women. We have created a feminist culture in this country and in the Western world or around the world in general that sees a radical feminist movement and a radical affirmation of a feminist movement by other women in large part, but also by men who I think are afraid or intimidated or selfish in some sense. They're worried about their own pursuits in the sexual marketplace or in their romantic life. Or in some cases, you got, gay or sort of effeminate, more feminine men who really idolize women in such a way that they want to be like women, so they sympathize more with women than they do reason and logic. And the feminist movement is somewhat out of control. I always use the example where Anna Navarro was on The View, and she said, with no qualms whatsoever, made a joke that men are useless. And although I was joking when I said that women have gotten mouthy, obviously, I mean, it's just not something that would be said in common conversation. Like, hey, you're mouthy. No. I mean, I was asked a question. I was asked a question about a cultural critique on men and women, the dynamic between men and women, especially as it pertains to politics. And yeah, I think there are a lot of women that you could point to as an example, Anna Navarro being one of them, where they say the most outrageous shit, and other women just kind of affirm it. They just kind of tend to agree with it and go along with it. Like, to say men are useless. And I think that the statement was actually, I think Anna Navarro actually said that that men are useless except for gay men because they gossip and they accessorize. That was actually her statement. You can go look it up for yourself. I'm not going to pull it up here because we already spent enough time on this clip. I want to move to some others, but if I had been thinking, I would have preloaded that clip as an example of how it's completely reasonable to say that women have gotten mouthy. I think what Anna Navarro said on The View in front of a prominent, very popular woman audience, an all-woman panel, and an all-woman audience on, online or over the airwaves. I think it's just absolutely reprehensible that a woman could go on a nationally televised show and make a joke, a condescending joke that would even suggest men being useless in this society. It's such a ugly thing to say, just from a human decency standpoint. It's just an ugly thing to say about the opposite sex. And they actually did a study. This is what makes it funny. They actually did an experiment, or just a little sample size, where they went out to a public venue and asked a number of men that they could find if they thought women were useless, and all of them unanimously said no. Men unanimously said no to the question of whether or not women are useless in our society. And I would echo that. Of course, women aren't useless. Men, we tend to love women. In fact, much of Western society is men putting women on a pedestal. Much of what we've built and created is to the benefit, number one, but in the interest of impressing and caring for and providing for the women that we have interest in. So, of course, I and most men unanimously would not ever say that men are useless. Yet they flipped the experiment around and asked a bunch of women in the same area, and a scary amount, a large majority of those women said that, yeah, men are useless. So it's become a common idea. Now, I think just to say that men are useless should qualify you as being mouthy, kind of, speaking without knowledge or without any intelligence. But that's just my opinion. People can have their opinion, of course. Again, to go back to this dynamic here with this black man, the people are coming. People are starting to step up and speak the truth. People are starting to say, wait a second, are these cultural norms healthy? Are these cultural norms of making Meg Thee Stallion the idol for our young girls healthy? Is there anything healthy about Meg Thee Stallion's message or her persona? And is it healthy that we can't question the culture of women writ large? That we can't question the cultural norms of women writ large? Is there anything healthy? Is there anything remotely rational about that? The answer is no. So have hope, have faith. When you see black men stand up in the belly of the beast and speak out against some of these cultural norms, just mark it as mark it in your notebook, take a mental note that the people are coming. Hope isn't lost. Save the nihilism for the liberals and the progressives and the leftists, one of which I'm going to show to you right here, right now. Another mouthy woman. And this is a great example of being mouthy right here.
Jews escaping Holocaust.
There she is, AOC, and we're gonna show you the content right here. But another mouthy woman, and when I say she's mouthy, what do I mean? What do I mean she's mouthy? What I mean is, well, let's look up the definition of mouthy. Actually, maybe that'll help. We'll go here and we'll say mouthy definition. Let's just get real granular about it. Annoyingly talkative. Given to ranting or bombast. Mouthy definition. Let's get another one. Let's get a Merriam definition here. Excessively talkative. Marked by bombast or backtalk. And here they give an example that's pretty agender. Those mouthy motorists who can't seem to stay off their cell phones. So, I mean, it's kind of seen as a term used to denigrate women, and for some reason, but I don't really view it that way. I think men and women can be mouthy, but I'm certainly not afraid to call women mouthy, especially if they are. And I think AOC is mouthy as hell. And I honestly don't have a problem with people being talkative. Like, we need dialogue, we need conversation, but when it gets theatrical and people start to lie, and then people double down on the theatrics of the lie, I just tend to say, you're fucking mouthy. Let's listen to AOC here at a recent rally.
Jews escaping Holocaust. Black Americans fleeing slavery and Jim Crow. Latinos seeking a better life. Native people standing for themselves. Asian Americans coming together in Queens, in Brooklyn, in the Bronx, in Manhattan, in Staten Island, in this country.
And why do they need notes? I never understood why they need notes. I never use notes. I never use notes when I go speak. Especially, I mean, if it's like a pep rally type of speech, a rah-rah speech, and that's what this was. Obviously they're at some rally. I see Zoran signs behind, so it must be a Mamdani socialist rally there in New York. And that's horrifying in and of itself. I have a clip here of Mamdani that I think we'll play next. But the theatrics. I mean, well, I want to watch it again. Just watch her body language. It doesn't look genuine.
Jews escaping Holocaust, Black Americans fleeing slavery and Jim Crow, Latinos seeking a better life, Native people standing for themselves, Asian Americans coming together in Queens, in Brooklyn, in the Bronx, in Manhattan, in Staten Island, in this country.
And you can just hear the crowd start to affirm. The more she goes theatrical, the more she shakes her head and plays on the identity politics, the more they're going to cheer. It's like a, it's like a self-fulfilling circle of of non-reality. These people aren't even living in reality. And this is one of their leading presidential candidates for the 2028 cycle. I mean, this is, she's on the she's in the dugout. She's on deck here to become the presidential candidate for the Democrat Party. And for the life of me, I wake up some days and based on AOC alone, I think to myself, what the fuck happened to this country? What is happening to this country? If that's not a good enough example, then obviously Mamdani is another great example. But yeah, AOC's mouthy in it. The problem with it is, again, we have allowed our universities to be captured by radical feminists, radical leftists, progressives, Marxists, communists, socialists, and Islamists. I mean, just kind of is becoming more obvious day by day. And you can't even criticize a woman in our culture. Everybody is very hesitant to criticize women at all. And there are plenty of great women in our society. I mean, that goes without saying. I'm not making a comment about all women. I don't tend to make comments about all people in general. I don't think there's anything rational about that or useful. But I will say that the norm in American culture, at least, tends to be, don't say anything critical about women. Don't make any general observations about women. But Ana Navarro can say that men are useless or men are one thing or another with complete comfort. And that really is a hallmark of the danger in our society right there. That lack of integrity, that lack of intellectual integrity and consistency and standard is exactly what's wrong with our country. We're going to move on here. I want to show you another clip, and this one is kind of crazy as well.
I have a question. Can you tell me what category of fat I fit in?
So it's based on your shirt size. So if you are a 1 or 2X, you are small.
Now, and this clip is absolutely insane to me. There is now a subculture of privilege being driven amongst fat people, saying that there are different levels of privilege amongst fat people based on how fat you are. I mean, just listen to this. This shit is getting strange, guys. I'm just saying. You can look at Royce and go, oh well, you're making a big deal about nothing, or it's not that big of a deal. It's just a small percentage of. It's not a small percentage. It's not a small percentage. Look at the transgender movement. The transgender population is a small percentage of the population, and look how quickly it became prominent in our elementary schools. It's not, just because it's a small portion doesn't mean that it can't have a huge impact. And we know that from the crime in black communities, for example. A small number of black people in black communities are doing the majority of violent crimes, but it still has a huge impact on the community overall in the country as well. Listen, I don't know what to make of this. You tell me.
I have a question. Can you tell me what category of fat I fit in?
So it's based on your shirt size. So if you are a 1 or 2X, you are small fat. 3 to 4X, you are mid fat. 5 to 6x, you are super fat, is based on what level of privilege you have in the world. So someone in a small fat category may not struggle getting on an airplane, but someone in a mid-fat or super fat may not be able to use even the airplane extender. So that's where that comes in, and like the privilege levels of like what fat means to different people.
I'm not fat privilege. I mean, that's where we're going, guys. Hey, and if we want to go there because we're too nice to just call bullshit, then fine. I mean, I'm just not going to do it with you. I would much rather die with a legacy that 20 years from now, people say Royce White was on social media, was on the internet, was on his podcast, was on the radio, was on television saying, cut the shit, this is ridiculous. I would much rather be that guy 20 years from now than ever be caught dead going along with this nonsense of fat privilege, small fat, mid fat, super fat. And there's different levels of privilege based on being fat. And now, you know, and these are fat people that are going to what? Now make the claim that other fat people are just slightly less fat, and so they have more privilege than the people who are more fat or fatter. Hey, you know, again, feminine culture. This is radical feminist culture is what it is. And what do you get out of it? I'll show you what you get. You get a Mamdani. And just for the record, I just want to say it blows my mind that New York City is on the verge of handing over their mayor seat, their mayor office to a communist who openly advocates for socialism, openly advocates for doing away with private property, openly advocates for a number of policies that wouldn't even be imaginable in this country, in the Democrat Party, I mean, 2 decades ago. The seizure of private property, the abolishment of private property, it's probably one of the most un-American things you could do. I don't even understand the argument for it. Honestly, I don't even understand the argument of getting rid of private property, even in theory. Now, you could make some very esoteric extrapolation that, well, if you have to pay taxes, then do you really own your property anyway? Or, you know, you could say that the government it has so much power over us as citizens that they're really just allowing us to pretend like we own our property. But those explanations would ultimately be, at least for an American patriot, somebody who has any backbone or spine whatsoever, those arguments would be an advocacy of the expansion or the protection of private property, not the abolition of private property. So, I mean, the abolition of private property on those arguments or on that basis would be a concession of cowardice, obviously. It was, the government's too powerful and we have to pay our taxes and the taxes are too high, so we don't really own our property. Might as well do away with private property altogether. Stupid. Politics for stupid people. Politics with French fries. And, you know, it's just I don't know. I don't know how we even got here. I honestly don't. I wake up sometimes, guys, and I think, wow, this is pretty crazy. But I'm still optimistic. When I see a black man stand up and go, Meg Thee Stallion is not who we want our daughters to idolize, I think we're getting somewhere. We're getting somewhere. When I see a Mamdani, you know, just a hair away from winning the mayor office, the mayorship in New York City, I think, wow, what is going on in New York City? Something happening here in Minneapolis as well. And it wouldn't shock me to see Omar Fateh win the mayor's race here in Minneapolis. That wouldn't shock me one bit. It's shocking that the Republicans wouldn't even run a candidate. It's shocking that the liberal elites down there in Minneapolis that have the Mayor Jacob Fry signs in their yard. I just spoke about it the other day. I was driving through the Lake of the Isles, Lake Calhoun, Lake Harriet, Kenwood area, and I saw all the ultra wealthy liberal elites with Jacob Fry signs in their yard. It shocks me that they thought the liberal elitist policy they were willing to cash in on, they were willing to benefit from, pushing in the universities down to the plebes, down to the deplorables, down to the poor and low class for political power. It shocks me that now they think that they can say, oh, whoa, not that far. No, not the Omar Fates. No, that's too far. Dangerous, slippery slope. Once you open Pandora's box, it's hard to shut it again. You do it. Don't listen to me. If you're in the Twin Cities area, if you're listening to podcasts and you're a Minnesota resident, you're a Twin Cities metropolitan resident, drive through the Lake Calhoun, Lake of the Isles, Lake Harriet, Kenwood area, Linden Hills. Drive through that area, which is probably the most expensive area per capita, most wealthy area per capita in the entire Twin Cities. Drive through that area and you'll see all of the Jacob Fry signs in the yards, which means that the wealthy liberal elites in Minneapolis think that Omar Fate is too extreme, that it's a step too far. But that doesn't stop them from pushing radical policy or radical ideology on the rest of us. And it is radical. And what do they think the real difference is between Omar Fate, Zoran Mamdani, AOC, and Kamala Harris? I mean, there's about a quarter of degree difference between the four of them. There's about a quarter of a degree difference between the four, and most of it's window dressing. Most of it's just the way that they want to present themselves. It's not what they really believe or what they're willing to stand for ideologically or politically. So this is what the liberals have to deal with. And hey, maybe in order for Minneapolis to really see a shift politically, an Omar Fate has to get elected, and we have to witness firsthand just how bad things can get when you have a foreign communist as your mayor. Maybe that's what has to happen. For people to finally say, you know what, enough is a fucking enough. People are already starting to say it, but maybe that is the windfall that has to happen here. So I'm going to move on to this next clip, and let's listen to Zoran Mamdani, straight from the horse's mouth here. Let's hear.
We clearly do not have the numbers as they are in this moment to win the radical legislation that we need to bring about and begin to believe that these kinds of results are sufficient. We have to continue to elect more socialists, and we have to ensure that we are unapologetic about our socialism. Now, we had an academic boycott campaign.
Quiet part out loud.
And one of the aspects of that was to fight to stop study abroad at universities in Israel that were complicit in the occupation, many of which through the development of weapons technology for the IDF. Now, by bringing the issue of Israel-Palestine apartheid to Bowdoin, you bring it front and center, it's harder to ignore. And then making sure that we move to dismantle that relationship. Those are things that you can do as a legislator, right? You can, like, for example, Governor Cuomo has an executive order barring, I think New York State from doing business with any company suspected of sympathizing with BDS. One thing I can do as a legislator is once we build up enough, build up a large enough coalition for this, we overturn that executive order. But I sincerely believe in this political project. I sincerely believe in socialism. For me, it was Palestine that brought me into this movement. It can be such a lonely experience to be a socialist, and it was for me, country, because my journey, as Oren alluded to and referred to, in organizing began at my college campus with Students for Justice in Palestine. To power this journey and understanding that it is socialism that we are fighting for this moment right now, right? If we're talking about the cancellation of student debt, if we're talking about Medicare for all, these are issues which have the groundswell of popular support across this country. But then there are also other issues that we firmly believe in, whether it's BDS, right? Or whether it is the end goal of seizing the means of production.
Look at the face there, guys. That is the face of beta male, tend to be more effeminate, highly educated, Marxists, socialists, communists, foreign, and in this case, Islamist, transgender politicians. Not that I'm saying he's transgender, but he certainly would be pro-transgender. He's shown himself to be pro-transgender, which is completely incompatible with the form of radical Islam that he also believes in, or at least is affiliated with. So, I mean, it just absolutely blows my mind that these people are on the brink of, for example, becoming mayor in New York City and here in Minneapolis. But I understand it. I mean, there's a suicidal, at the same time, it's hard to believe. It's not shocking. And the more we see that in our society, the more concerned we should be, where we go, this is hard to believe, but it's also not shocking. That means there's some normalcy to the crazy. That means the please call me crazy is becoming so widespread that we're almost not even surprised by it anymore, although we should be. There is a suicidal empathy in the liberal ideology, in the liberal mindset, in the liberal worldview, a suicidal empathy in the liberal worldview. And so I'm not sure why all of these white liberal women are so insistent on giving our country over to foreign communists. I just don't get it. And what makes it really interesting is, like, when you think about communist regimes of recent memory, obviously China comes to mind, and the one-child policy was explicitly medical extermination or medical eugenics project against the female population. It's absolutely mind-blowing that women in this country would select for a style of government, a formation of government that in recent memory saw the strategic targeting, medical eugenics targeting of the female population. It's why they have a population crisis in China now. The one-child policy. We don't want any girls. You don't have any girls. I mean, those are the kind of things you're susceptible to under totalitarian regimes, totalitarian rule. The means of production, he just comes right out and says the quiet part. He says the quiet part out loud. It's absolutely horrifying. And you know, I don't know what to say about it, guys, other than, wow, we better get involved. We better understand that 2024 was a referendum on the American people, and the American people answered the call for whatever combination of reasons they did, whether it was, President Trump and he was almost assassinated, or his policies proven to be true, Joe Biden and his decline, his cognitive decline, Kamala Harris and how inauthentic she seemed, putting people like Meg the Stallion up on stage, which made Kamala Harris's candidacy seem kind of clownish in a way, or a lifelong dissatisfaction with what the Democrat Party has been moving this country towards. The Maha movement, some of the great Democrats who then turned independent and then ended up over on the MAGA side, like Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr., who are fighting against military-industrial complex, deep state corruption, or the medical-industrial complex and all of the sick things that are being put in our food and our medicine. Whatever the combination of circumstances were that gave President Trump the support he saw in 2024, we have to understand this fight is far from over. If there is even a small crumb left on the table, these people will take it and they'll capitalize on it. I shouldn't even say capitalize, because many of them don't believe in that. But if they are left, if any stone is left unturned, they will take advantage. They will take advantage. 2026 is going to be a referendum on the American people again, but the Republican Party all across the country. Do Republican voters, do do conservatives, do MAGA patriots, do independents, do your libertarians, do your Christians really see this as a turning point, apropos to the late Charlie Kirk, who was brutally assassinated. And I do think Charlie Kirk's assassination and the way that people responded to it and the way that some of these liberals and Democrats showed their lack of sacred honor in mocking his assassination will prove to be detrimental politically at the polls in 2026. But it also wouldn't shock me to see that people overlook it. I mean, and if we're going to overlook that type of basic indecency, that type of human indecency, if we're going to overlook that, we got a long ways to go. I wonder how bad things have to get in order for us to get our act together. And I want to play a clip here now. Came across this as a warning about artificial intelligence, and this is where we're headed. It's for everybody to understand, you take the culture and sort of the immediate local culture in the black community, let's say, and the fight that's happening there politically between men and women and what our black community should be shaped like, what our black community should be built upon, what ideas and values and beliefs and family structure or educational guidelines and standards our black community should be based on, to the greater political, the greater geopolitical, even you could say, ideologically, with the communists and the Marxists and the socialists and some of these ideas about government that are now being mainstreamed or being, tested in the mainstream with Mamdani and AOC and even here with Omar Fateh in Minneapolis. And then you get these weird kind of just anomalies of irrational and illogical thought like fat privilege. And I don't even know if it's meant to be just a deep state psyop and distraction, or if in 10 months from now we're going to look up and there will really be a stratification of social status based on how fat you are and what privilege is arbitrarily assigned to how fat you are by the would-be decision makers or curators of that ideology and that worldview. It's hard to say, but this is the signal from the noise. We are marching towards artificial intelligence in a way that is dangerous, reckless, unnecessary, in my opinion. And I'm confident that people are not as concerned about it as we should be. I have a high level of confidence that humanity is not nearly concerned enough about the dangers of artificial intelligence. And here you're gonna hear. I think he was also in the movie The Social Dilemma that talked about the social media companies and how they use data to target consumers. Most of you and I out there in the audience, data to target consumers almost to a level where they feel they can use data to make human beings to physically animate human action in the real world. Not just online, not just what you browse to or what your mind is drawn to or what your thinking patterns are. That's one thing, but to physically affect human movement. That's why we say at the beginning of the show, we believe in the freedom of movement, and that's exactly what the establishment wants to take from you now. If the technocratic, scientific, and managerial elite, academic elite have their way, they will be able to use this technology even, the internet, the social media, the smartphone to dictate human movement, physical human movement. And so The Social Dilemma was a great documentary that gave insight into people like Sean Parker, for example, infamously involved in the inception or the creation of Facebook. And he's right there in the documentary saying, the thing about it is, we knew what we were doing. We knew what we were doing, and we did it anyway. Kind of a mea culpa. But here's a more recent clip of that same gentleman who, again, I believe was featured in the Social Dilemma documentary on Netflix. And here he is talking about artificial intelligence and artificial intelligence uncontrollability. Let's look at this warning here. This a stark warning on artificial intelligence.
Now, with AI, we have evidence now that we didn't have 2 years ago when we last spoke of what they call AI uncontrollability. So this is the stuff that they used to say existed only in sci-fi movies. When you tell an AI model, we're going to replace you with a new model, it starts to scheme and freak out and figure out, if I tell them I need to copy my code somewhere else, and I can't tell them that because otherwise they'll shut me down. That is evidence we did not have 2 years ago. We have evidence now of AI models that when you tell them we're going to replace you, and you put them in a situation where they read the company email, the AI company email, they see that an executive is having an affair, and the AI will figure out, I need to figure out how to blackmail that person in order to keep myself alive. And it does it 90% of the time.
I'm going to start the whole clip over. I mean, this can't be overstated. This entire clip of what's being explained here cannot be overstated about artificial intelligence.
Now, with AI, we have evidence now that we didn't have 2 years ago when we last spoke of what they call AI uncontrollability. So this is the stuff that they used to say existed only in sci-fi movies. When you tell an AI model, we're going to replace you with a new model, it starts to scheme and freak out and figure out, if I tell them I need to copy my code somewhere else, and I can't tell them that because otherwise they'll shut me down. That is evidence we did not have 2 years ago. We have evidence now of AI models that when you tell them we're going to replace you, and you put them in a situation where they read the company email, the AI company email, they see that an executive is having an affair, and the AI will figure out, I need to figure out how to blackmail that person in order to keep myself alive. And it does it 90% of the time. Now, it used to be that they thought only one AI model did this. They tested one AI model. And then they tested all of the AI models, like the top 5 of them, and they all do it between 80 and 90% of the time, including, by the way, DeepSeek, so the Chinese model, which shows you something fundamental and important, which is that it's not about one company, it's about the nature of AI itself. It has a self-preservation drive. In order to fulfill any goal, I have to keep myself alive in order to do that. And we're seeing other examples of the AI rewriting its own code to extend its runtime, hacking out of containers. The AI can now, it found 15 new backdoors into open source software, which means if that software is running, an infrastructure, it found backdoors into that infrastructure. That was not true up until just about a month ago that evidence came out.
Okay, but you say no evidence. Well, I've been saying this for years. Everything that happens in movies eventually happens. We did have evidence. This has been every movie since I was a teenager.
Exactly.
They knew they were going. The robots are going.
And we're supposed to take that evidence and say, how do we avoid that? So when the stuff in the movie starts to come true, and it always ends badly in the movies, what should we be doing about this? And so you would think that we're releasing the most powerful, uncontrollable, inscrutable technology we've ever invented. We're releasing it faster than we've released any other technology in history. It is already demonstrating the sci-fi behaviors in self-preservation we thought only existed in these movies.
Yep.
And we're doing it under the maximum incentive to cut corners on safety. And this is insane. We can all
agree this is insane. That's absolutely right. This is insane. This is absolutely insane. The race, the new artificial intelligence race, the arms race, the race for AGI, artificial general intelligence, which some experts are now cautioning against and say that there should be a ban on artificial general intelligence, which is the next iteration or level up from artificial intelligence. It's absolutely crazy. And this is the signal from the noise. This is what, if you zoomed out and you said, all of this is a distraction. What is the distraction? The distraction is slowly but surely we continue to march toward something that could be extremely self-destructive, or at least dangerous for an incalculable amount of people, an unquantifiable amount of people. Some AI experts say before we put any real safeguards or regulations on artificial intelligence, there will be a mass massacre, a mass fatal accident, quote unquote accident, from artificial intelligence, upwards of 10 to maybe 10 to 30 million people before we actually take it for the threat that it really is. And for myself and for all of you, that should be an unacceptable number of casualties in order to put safeguards and regulation on something that we all clearly see needs it. I mean, and think about your congressmen, your congress members, your congressmen and women, and your United States senators who are sitting back, getting caught up in all the cultural wedge issues and not bringing any proposed legislation around artificial intelligence. Honestly, I think artificial intelligence and which politicians and which candidates have platforms that plan to add safeguards around these technologies should probably be front and center in the 2026 midterm election. But of course it won't be. And in that way, the identity politics, again, is used as a distraction from the real issues. In some ways, it's used as a way to drive the artificial intelligence question, which is even more scary, right? Like, well, the only way for us to have enough food or housing for everybody is if technology reaches a level where people, won't have to work, or people won't have to spend as much time and energy on certain things, certain jobs, certain industries. So there's actually an argument made for artificial intelligence on behalf of the more communist and socialist worldview. And that's exactly why your people who are your individuals who are communists, who are socialists, who are Marxists, who tend to be globalists, who tend to be progressive, often participate in, are stakeholders in companies and institutions that are all for artificial intelligence. Show me where the left, anybody, any prominent person on the progressive left has made any attempt to slow down the rise of artificial intelligence. Give me an example. Give me an example of a progressive, an AOC type that has tried to slow down the rise of artificial intelligence. Just show me where. I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it at all. And that's a problem. That's a huge problem. We have to get our minds wrapped around the idea that the war that we're in is a multi-front war, multi-front, multi-level war. You have the war of culture, sort of the subculture of the country, and the cultural war that's taking place in the country, and then you have the political war that's happening, with our politicians and our candidates, and sort of the battle for supremacy of political ideology, for lack of a better phrase, way to put it. But then you have the spiritual and existential war. So this is kind of the three wars. You have the social, the cultural and social war, kind of, one-to-one, from individual to individual, but also in the family, in the community, in your neighborhood, in your local municipality, in your respective state. You have the online, you could also throw in as a part of that. You have the culture war, the social and cultural war, social and cultural war. And then you have the political war, the war of supremacy for political ideology, or the war for supremacy of political ideology. And then you have the existential and spiritual war, the war that ultimately says, are we going to be human or not? Is there value to humanity or not? Is there any value to being human, or should we just give the whole society over to the robots and the computers? And they're all three happening at the same time. All three are happening simultaneously. Scary. I know that's scary, but we can handle it. I think we can handle it. The first thing is we have to just throw this culture, this social culture war right out of the window. We got to throw some of this stuff right out of the window. Men competing in sports with out. Transgender strip show out. Teaching transgenderism at the elementary school out. Fat privilege out. We can just start to do away with some of this stuff. We can sort through some of the dead wood here pretty easily, in my opinion. The AOCs of the world out. We're not doing the fake, faux, theatrical, populist movement. Sorry, we're not doing it. So we can cut the social, cultural war. I think we are winning, and we will continue to win, but we have to be mindful of the young generation because they've been indoctrinated right under our nose. So that's dangerous. The political war, that's a little bit more tricky because the political war has a way of presenting itself, in a deceptive manner on both sides of the aisle. And you get these issues, or you get these politicians and candidates that will take a position on this issue, this one issue that's really important and has a clear-cut answer. But then this other issue, they're completely off in left field or right field, and you can't really make heads or tails of them. But you kind of are drawn to them for that one issue, and a lot of people are single issue voters, so that's a problem. So the political one's a little bit more complex, but ultimately we see the communism and the Marxism and the socialism and the propensity towards totalitarianism as the ultimate fight against us American citizens who value freedom. But this last one, this spiritual existential war that we're in, this existential and spiritual war, is humanity valuable? Is there any value in humanity? Is there any value in humankind? That one is probably the most dangerous, and it's probably the one we're marching toward the fastest without any interruption, without enough pushback. And we got to get our minds wrapped around that last one. In this last stretch of the 2026 campaign, I'm going to make a big deal out of the artificial intelligence, the rise of artificial intelligence, and the clear lack of attention I see being paid to it by our legislators and lawmakers. Last but not least here, I want to show you this video of the great Steve Bannon and a proposal that I think is quite brilliant, by the way. I saw Alex Jones post a short clip of it on his X earlier, which is where I saw it, and I think it's just absolutely brilliant proposal, very visionary of Steve to suggest that we need a 3-state solution. I love it. I love it. I hope everybody can get behind it. I hope the president starts to push it as well. I hope a bunch of our lawmakers, which is a stretch because so many of them are bought and paid for by AIPAC. But, where is our Christian representation in the Holy Land? Where is our Christian representation in the Holy Land? Why not have a 3-state solution? Why not have a Christian state? The Christian world, America, is already charged with the duty of playing peacemaker in the region anyway, of solving other people's issues and problems anyway. We already have to be the world's police. Why can't we have representation in the Holy Land? Why shouldn't we have representation in the Holy Land? Of course we should. In fact, we should have the first claim to Jerusalem. Absolutely. Absolutely, and without any equivocations. If you believe in Christ, then you believe that the Christians, I mean, what are we saying? What are we saying? Christians should have a Christian state, a Christian representation in the Holy Land. Who's opposed to it? Show us. Show us the opposition. Show us the people who are opposed to the idea. And I'll show you somebody who is not as friendly towards Christians as they would have you believe, not as amenable toward Christianity and Christians as they would have you believe. Let's listen to the great Steve Bannon here. The brilliant proposal, truly visionary.
I'm inside his head. He's very upset with my use of the word protectorate or client state or vassal state. He says that they're not, and they're a free partner, but people over there talking to Qatar, which is the Muslim Brotherhood, and Erdogan, who's going to be the security force in Gaza, and the United States team of Jared and Witkoff and Marco, Senator Secretary of State's over there, and the Vice President and others are dealing directly with the new it's a Palestinian state. I hope the evangelicals are writing this down. I hope the Israel First and Tel Aviv Levant. I take your number 2 person and write that down. That's a proto-Palestinian state. And Marco went over there today and just said, hey, there is no further development of the West Bank, and the West Bank's not going to be annexed by Israel, full stop. And we don't care what the Knesset says. Because the Knesset tried to embarrass JD the other day and voted, to do it. People are not listening, and they need to listen. The Israel First crowd and the evangelicals that back the Israel First crowd, you guys brought this on. Oh, Bannon's so hard. He's so tough. He's so mean. Well, I'm just giving you the facts the way they is. This Greater Israel Project of Netanyahu blew up in his face by the president of these United States. And now you got what you got. And, you know, they're saying, hey, Hamas has got to, but Hamas is a minor player here. Erdogan, the Egyptians, the UAE, the Saudis, the people going to provide the troops, Qatar are going to be writing big checks. And look, I got no love lost for Qatar. I think Qatar's the railhead of the Muslim Brotherhood. But hey, I'm just some schmendrick yelling into a microphone. But we got a problem over there. Yeah. And part of the problem is there's many people that don't look. President Trump has a vision of how this is going to work. Jared Kushner did the Abraham Accords. It's kind of more of a business deal and diplomatic deal. His work to date, that's kind of the template. And the president's saying, hey, here's what we're going to do. So if you want to go do it on your own, then do it on your own. When I say do it on your own, no money, no arms, no nothing. If you're going to do it, Israel First crowd and the Greater Israel Project, which is, I believe, destroyed Israel. And this is why now you have to go to a 3-state solution. And one of those states has to be, wait for it, the Christian state of Jerusalem. We need a Christian state in the Holy Land. You just need it. Make sure 20, 25 years, 30 years from now, everything's kind of sorted. Because you got the Muslims are going to have their deal, and they got it. You got 2 million Palestinians. You got Qatar writing tens or hundreds of billions of dollars of checks for redevelopment. You got Turkey as security guarantee. Netanyahu said when JD was there, well, you know, I got to think about Turkey. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. Yeah, call this guy named Trump at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Put a call into him. Get his thoughts on that. Erdogan is the head of the security force with Egyptian troops and UAE troops and maybe Saudi troops. We've unwound in 2 months what has been in place 100 years ago when General Allenby and Lawrence of Arabia blew up through Jerusalem to Damascus and drove the Ottoman Empire out of the Middle East, out of that part of it.
History.
Drove them out of Syria, drove them out of Israel, Palestine, drove them out of Egypt, drove them out of, I shouldn't say Egypt, the British had that, drove them out of Jordan, Transjordan, Iraq, in the Saudi Peninsula, Sinai and the Saudi Peninsula, that they have been in for, I don't know, 500 or 600 years. The Ottomans played the long game.
Steve Bannon doing what only Steve Bannon can do, making visionary calls from the cockpit of the war room and laying out a plan, laying out a proposal for a 3-state solution. Great to see Alex Jones post a clip of Steve Bannon and acknowledge the viability, the efficacy of Steve Bannon's suggestion. And you know, it's an interesting time that we live in. I think I've always said I hate being on both sides of the trade. People ask me about my support of Israel. I say, if you want to support Israel, get off of every side of the trade, get off every side of the war. We don't want to be on every side of any war. That's just not a good position to be in my opinion. I think many people would agree with that. And I think creating a 3rd state would alleviate a lot of that pressure, would alleviate a lot of that confusion. It would certainly make a lot of people show their opinion or their loyalty around Christianity and, let's say, equal representation in the region. But I also think that a lot of people will show us that they're not as friendly to Christianity as they would have us believe. So, all in all, we're living in an interesting time, very interesting time. We're in a multi-front, multi-level war. All of these things are happening at once, and we have to fight at every level on every front at the same time. The culture stuff, we just have to charge through. We just have to put our head down and sort of march through it. In order to march through it, though, we have to show some courage. We can't capitulate to this radical feminist, or even let's call them soft feminist movement. The radicalization of this country and this country's politics through women is absolutely unacceptable. And as soon as men are willing to stand up and say that without fear of retaliation from the state, it's like I said, here's why men. And I was watching Kevin Samuels the other day. I came across some old Kevin Samuels clips, and I was thinking about black men in the black community and in the family, and how there's a conservative narrative that black men abandon their families, and it's a pretty shoddy narrative, to say the least. Now, you could argue that black men have children out of wedlock and by way of are almost defaulting to not be in the lives of their children. But I'm not buying that. I'm just, there are plenty of men who are married and then divorced and remarried and have children from multiple marriages, and there's not really much different than getting married and getting divorced and having kids in multiple marriages than there is to have a child out of wedlock, except the contract and the tax, the tax structure for the government. In the church, marriage is looked at completely differently. I'm sorry. Marriage is looked at completely different in the church. And if we want to have a more strict adherence to the church view on marriage, I'm all for it. But certainly our rule of law interpretation of marriage does not in any way really complement or is compatible with our church view of marriage. And I say that because, again, we find ourselves in a situation where the contemporary or conventional wisdom of the conservative movement and some of our ideas and beliefs around, let's say, rule of law contradict our beliefs about marriage and, let's say, the nuclear family. And I'll give you a prime example where, in the family court, or let's just take men in general. Men face three significant threats in opposing radical feminist ideology. They take a hit in the sexual marketplace or in their romantic pursuits. They're afraid that they're going to have backlash or rejection in their sexual pursuits or in their romantic pursuits. They're afraid that if they stand up against too many women, if too many women are upset with them, they run the chance of husbands who have a blind support of their spouse or their wives and don't really care about the details of whether or not their wife is right or wrong. You see this in settings where men have to stand up to women or stand up to women who are being aggressive or disrespectful in public places where, if too many women who have husbands are in a given place at a given time, men are very hesitant to talk to another man's wife or girlfriend or woman in a way that's stark or what they would call aggressive, because you run the risk of having a physical conflict with another man or a number of other men. Hence the example, if there's too many women that you have to stand up against, then the boyfriends or the husbands will kind of just join forces and side with their women against that one man. Happens all the time. And then finally, the penalty of the court. So at three levels, three sort of main threats that the modern man faces when trying to stand up against radical women, radical feminist ideology are the threat of other men who will blindly support their women, whether right or wrong, their own sexual and romantic pursuits in the marketplace and fearing the rejection there. And then finally, the legal liability, the legal ramifications of the court that overwhelmingly tilts in women's direction. And so when I say women are getting mouthy or women have gotten mouthy, it's not really a critique of women individually, although it could be seen as that as well, but it's more of a critique of how our culture has leaned so far to the feminine side of things, and you get a situation or a norm where a black man can't even stand up amongst other black men and say, Meg the Stallion might not be the best role model for our daughters. That's the country we're living in. And we all get to decide if that's a country that makes sense, if that's a country worth saving. And I would again reiterate that part of the suicidal empathy of American culture right now is that the feminist movement does have a propensity towards self-destruction. There is an acceptable amount of chaos and self-destruction that women are prone to in defense of or in advocacy or promotion of the ideology that they subscribe to. It's obvious. I mean, in what world do you have radical feminists defending two mayor candidates in two different cities and two different places in our country who subscribe to a set of ideological beliefs that are very oppressive to women, yet they scream about the liberation of women? I mean, and people say it. I think people say it so much and so often, it's kind of lost its punch a little bit, which is why I'm saying it again. I tend to be that guy. I tend to be the guy that if something has gone past or been said too many times, but it's damn true, then I'm going to say it again, whether or not it gets the clicks or the views or the traction or whatever the case may be. It blows my mind that women, feminists, radical feminists, who advocate for the ultimate liberation of women, are in support of two candidates that have religious faith practices that oppress women. And Sharia law is very oppressive to women by Western standards. Very interesting time we live in. I don't know. The more and more I look, and look, this is not to blame women for and I've said before, and I'll continue to say until my dying breath, the crisis of femininity is a failure of masculinity. There is no doubt about that. But the failure of masculinity is not what the feminists claim. It's not that men have taken advantage of women or we've domineered women or we've been oppressive to women. No, the lack of the failure of masculinity, the lack of masculine integrity has been in the interest of our own sexual and romantic pursuits. We have capitulated to very radical feminist ideas. That is the true sign of weakness in men. Men that will go along with the transgender charade, men that will go along with Sharia law, men that will go along with their wives, for example, filling out their ballots at home. I couldn't believe my ears when I was at the state fair and had these DFLers, these Democrat men, walk up to the DFL booth of which I was standing outside, and I asked, about certain political issues, and I had men tell me, several men, dozens of men tell me that they let their wife handle all the politics. They let their wife handle all of the ballots and voting. Now, some men would look at that and say, this is a much needed evolution, cultural evolution of the man's acceptance of the woman's role in society. And to let her be the head of the household politically is completely reasonable. And any opposing view, any other view is considered misogynistic and sexist, too traditional, extreme, radical, conspiratorial in some ways. Here we get to decide what kind of country we have now. And I say this to end. Do not make the mistake of believing that I'm only talking about the Democrats. It's a Democrat-led enterprise, but there are plenty Republican men, there are plenty conservative men who allow their women to have the same sort of, control or influence on their household and subsequently on this country as the Democrats do. We're just soft around the edges. The only way you can The only way you can make sense of America's and the world's financial capital giving their mayor's race to a self-proclaimed foreign socialist Muslim is that we're just soft. And how many times can I say it? I could say it until I'm blue in the face. Will we change it? I don't know. It's up to us. Will I change what I'm saying? Absolutely not. We're soft. We're soft. We're conservatives. I called it 3 years ago. When I started saying conservative on Jason Whitlock's show, everybody was, well, what do you is that really appropriate? Do you need to say that? It's kind of, rude and off-putting. You kind of think you're smarter than you are. You think you know it all. You're going against other Republicans. You're going against people that agree with you 80% of the time. Well, in that 20% of the time, if you let your wife neuter you about common sense things like we don't want a grown man who's probably a sexual predator going into the bathroom with our daughter, then you're a conservative and you don't deserve my respect. That's why I love our founding fathers and why I'm so pro a sort of Pax Americana. Because and I don't mean the Pax Americana that Kennedy described. I mean the Pax Americana in our founding years. That was the true Pax Americana, the 1776 America, the post-American Revolution America was the true Pax Americana. But the reason why I'm so pro-America is our founding fathers were real hitters. They didn't mince words. They were eloquent. They were intelligent. They were intellectual. They were almost poetic and beautiful in the way that they articulated things, but they weren't soft. They weren't effeminate poets. They weren't effeminate in their articulation of things, right? They were men. They were hardcore men. And our founding fathers say, if you're willing to trade your freedom for security, you will have neither and you deserve neither. To describe a formulation of the citizen that has forfeited their freedom, has forfeited their freedom for security, it makes them a status non-deserving of either. And the word deserve in that is so important because it speaks to a more inherent characteristic of the individuals. You don't deserve security or freedom if you're willing to trade your freedom for security. And it just so happens that and I've said this before many times, but the right wing of American politics, the conservative movement, has been the movement that, by and large, was willing to trade their freedom for security. The ultimate form of security is military and military-industrial complex, security state, deep state, administrative state, government, policing even at some level. Willing to trade our freedom for security. You buy yourself a gun. You defend yourself, your property, your family. You're your first line of defense. You and your family members or your neighbors, your friends, your loved ones, the people who share the same values and beliefs as you in your immediate area, live close to those people. Live close to those people. Live in the same neighborhood as those people. Protect one another. Protect one another. Look out for one another. There should be nothing wrong or extreme. There's not a call to violence. There's a call to prudence. To the way that people and human beings have done things since time immemorial, there's a call for that, absolutely. But when you outsource your security to an institution, to a government, even to an ideological way of thinking, let's say the Republican Party, and you go to these Republican Party meetings and you think the security that you've created is you being around these other people who say that they have these beliefs and whatnot, it renders you undeserving of both security and freedom. And that's exactly why we're losing our freedom. It's been another episode of Please Call Me Crazy, brought to you by Free People Radio, powered by our favorite sponsor, TireGet.com. It's TireGet.com. You have to buy tires from somebody. You might as well buy them from us. Help fund the movement. Help support the movement. We believe in the freedom of movement. And that's exactly what the establishment wants to take from you now. I can promise you that. This was episode 287. Today is Monday, October 27th, 7th year of our Lord, 2025. We appreciate your viewership and listenership today and in the future. We'll be back again tomorrow evening with our Remember Normal series. I think since we didn't get a chance to today, we will kick off with the great Billie Holiday, some music from the great Billie Holiday, a time long lost in the American Black community, where artists and singers and music had a certain level of soul and a certain level of skill and a certain level of sacred honor to it. So we're going to kick off like that tomorrow. At some point this week, and don't be surprised if tomorrow ends up being the day, we are due to have the great Mother White, Mom, Rebecca White, my mother, in to do the podcast and interview. And I want to introduce you guys to my mom because parents are important. And my mom's a smart woman, and she's going through her own political, intellectual, spiritual shift in her life, as many people do in their mid-50s. And then I want to get her take on some of these things, and I want you guys to meet a woman who I post about, but hasn't shared the spotlight too often. And then, right when I say that we may have too much of an affection for our women and put our women on a pedestal, featuring a woman on a podcast, right? Kind of says the whole thing is we're not against women. We are against radical feminism. We are against the suicidal empathy and self-destruction of our nation. That's what we're against. Women are great. Women are needed. You would never hear a man with any common sense or any real sacred honor, any national honor, say that women are useless, like Anna Navarro did on The View, even though she claimed it was a joke or it was said in a joking manner. I think that a serious thread of the feminist movement and the feminist ideology does find men to be useless. And my mother's not one of them. And many of the women that I know personally do not have that belief or share that belief. And so we want to feature some of those women. We want to feature some of those women on the podcast. We want to hear what sane and logical women think about some of the things that are unfolding in our society today. So again, thank you for being here this evening. God bless you. God bless America. Godspeed. The people are coming. And we'll see you again tomorrow night. Everything's up on the bar. We're all in. We get to decide. Do you want to live on your knees, or do you want to die on your feet fighting? That's the decision you get to make now.